Seeing none, we'd like a good vote on the amendment.
Representative Jean has explained the amendment. Would anyone like to speak against the amendment? Representative Ray, you're recognized to speak against the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, there's a lot in this amendment that I'm in support of in terms of one-time spending, but the $300 million that we have recently, at the last minute, been asked to set aside for this economic development project, I cannot support. And I typically vote against a lot of these similar types of policies, but I'm not sure that I always do a very good job of explaining why. So I want to try and do some of that. I think that, first of all, while well-intentioned, these sorts of policies are not the proper role of government. And what I mean by that is when taxpayers pay their taxes, they expect their money to go to a limited government that funds the core functions of that government. Things like roads and bridges, education for our kids, sewer and water infrastructure, police and fire, correctional facilities to house people that need to be separated from the rest of society. I don't believe that they expect, the taxpayers that is, for us to redistribute hundreds of millions of dollars of their tax money to profitable companies that most likely have hundreds of millions of dollars in annual profit already without us giving them any more. And so not only do I not think it's the proper role of government to do this, I also think that these policies in general aren't so great. I think that the government generally makes for a lousy venture capitalist, and they're spending OPM, which, Representative Lundstrom, I know that's your favorite acronym, other people's money. And so when you spend other people's money, you don't accurately assess risk in the same manner as if you would your own. And I understand the arguments for this type of project, and I respect a lot of the people that make those sorts of arguments. They make arguments like, well, everyone else is offering these sorts of deals, so we have to offer them as well. They say things like there's clawback measures in place, so there's not really any risk involved. And I understand those arguments, but I think that there's a better way. Because if this is the way that jobs are actually created, then why aren't all jobs created this way? Why don't we just have a massive fund of money that all companies apply and get a slice of anytime they agree to create X amount of jobs? I think we know the answer to why that's not the case. It's because the state and its agencies are not a substitute for the market. And I also understand that these sorts of projects are always really popular generally, especially with elected officials, because the easiest thing to do in politics is to vote for a, quote, jobs project, because you get to go to the groundbreaking and wear the hard hat and turn the dirt and take the picture and put it on social media and brag in your re-election about the jobs that you created. And you can see the result because there's a physical plant and there's workers that work there. But what you don't see, what's harder to see, are the things that don't happen. You don't see the plant that doesn't open somewhere else in the state because we sucked $300 million extra dollars out of the economy in the form of taxes than we needed to. You don't see the worker that doesn't get hired because the taxes came in $300 million higher than they needed to. You don't see the small business that didn't expand or the company that just never made the decision to relocate here. And I think that's extrapolated out hundreds, if not thousands of times in communities all across the state. And so that's the opportunity cost. You see the benefit. The benefit is concentrated and it's visible. The costs are dispersed and they're invisible because they just never materialized. We never allowed them to happen. And so that's generally why I think these sorts of policies are not always a good idea. But I also think that there's a better way. I think the better way of pursuing job creation as a policy is to have an intense, laser-like focus on making our general business climate the best in the country by aggressively lowering our income taxes, doing away with uncompetitive policies like we have on inventory tax and like we're trying to do on throwback rule and on net operating loss, and reducing red tape, investing in workforce development and all those sorts of things. And we have done, we have made significant progress in a lot of these areas, and it's showing. Our job numbers currently are better than at any time, I believe, in the history of our state. And that's why I think we actually ought to double down on the current policies that we're pursuing and not take our eye off the ball with some of these types of projects. And I ask you to look at the cost, because $300 million is a lot of money. And there's a couple of ways to think about this. If you go and look at a 10-year look back of what our state corporate income tax collects, every company, every corporation in the state that pays into corporate income tax, several years out of the last 10, those numbers after refunds have hovered at around $400 million. So what we're saying, we're taking the better part of an entire year's worth of corporate income tax collections from every corporation in the state that pays corporate income tax, and then we're redistributing it to one company for one project. Another way to look at it is in comparison to other similar projects. You know, I don't know that we use the term anymore, but the super project term that I've heard people talk about. It was mentioned the Big River Steel project. Well, that project was, if I'm not mistaken, was $125 million, less than half of the cost of this project. The most recent one that I remember was the JLTV project in Camden that we ended up not winning. That was going to be $83 million. And I think that was repayable loans, if I remember correctly. So what they're asking us to do on this is twice the size of those two projects combined. Or sorry, it's more than those two projects combined, is what I was trying to say. And so what I hope we think about is that there's a tremendous opportunity cost to doing this. You know, we're in year 3 of year 7 on the phase out of the throwback rule. And if my math is correct, we could simply set aside a fraction of the money that we're being asked to consider here, and we could go ahead and eliminate the throwback rule immediately and not wait 4 more years to become competitive by that economic measure. We could do something similar with net operating loss, which we're one of the most uncompetitive in the country at 10 years on that provision. Most states are at 20. We could do something very similar there. These are the kind of examples, hopefully will give you an idea of what I'm talking about. We don't have to pursue job creation as a policy one project at a time. It's my opinion that we will always be a poor state if our mindset is predominantly to try and convince companies and ply them to come here one by one with taxpayer money. I think there's a better way by focusing intently on a pro-growth business climate that benefits all businesses generally and not just the politically favored. So in other words, are we going to do the thing that benefits companies in every district in the state that's represented here in this chamber, or are we going to do a thing that benefits just basically one area or a handful of districts? And also, in terms of who benefits, I think it's important to think about this, that we know very little about this, but I think it's safe to say that a very significant chunk of the jobs that are going to be created are going to go to people that live in Memphis, Tennessee, and South Haven, Mississippi. The population of West Memphis is 24,500 people. The Memphis, Tennessee metro area is 1.3 million people. So really, think about where those jobs are going to go to. And then there's another 55,000 people that live in South Haven, Mississippi. The other thing that bothers me about this are the optics of it. I fully support reforming a lot of our general welfare policies to ensure that the resources are reserved for the truly needy and not just anybody that wants a handout for the government. And so I generally support those things, like the money we're putting aside for SNAP eligibility to try and improve our error rate. if we're going to go, it just looks bad if we're going through those programs with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that nobody who's not eligible is accidentally getting those benefits, and then we turn around on the other hand and dole out $300 million to a massive corporation that's already profitable. Not to mention the timing. I mean, I know Representative Jean mentioned that this is sort of last minute. I mean, I read about this in the newspaper. I didn't hear about this from the agency. They didn't, to the best of my knowledge, we've not really had much of a public opportunity to ask questions and get answers on this. If you disagree with everything I've said so far up until this point, you could at least agree that we ought to have more time to ask questions about this, to vet it and deliberate a little bit longer. So, in closing, I guess I just want to say, I don't want to be misinterpreted. I hope we get this project, whatever it is. I hope they choose Arkansas, and I hope they come here and create a boatload of jobs. But I don't want that to happen on the backs of the hardworking taxpayers of this state. I think we have to ask ourselves, who is this benefiting? Is it benefiting taxpayers generally? Is it benefiting the people that live in your district? Or is it benefiting whatever company we're talking about here?